All right, here we go. I've said this a lot on my podcast, folks. If somebody pulls out a napkin and starts writing on it, then it's really important to pay attention. That usually means that they've got something that's like just important enough that they have to get a napkin and write on it. Well, I've talked about this before. There's two really important leadership qualities that I learned on a napkin. I won't spoil them yet. But my mentor told me about them, and the guy that he got this from is my guest today. So, Tim Spiker, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Hampton. I am really excited to be here with you and to get a chance to visit with you and your audience.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, this is fun. Before this, we were talking, and Tim said 4 things that I wish I was recording. So I was like, don't say another word. Let me press record, and let's get going. Tim, and I'll tell you a little about him before and after this. Tim is a big leadership guy, and we've got a lot to talk to you about today, but I really just would love to hear some of your story. I mean, I know you were even in college to be, an engineer, right? And then now you're doing
That's true.
Not engineering. So if you want to kind of walk us to where where you were and how you are today, that I would love to hear that.
Yeah. Well, my undergraduate degree is in electrical engineering, and my very honest statement that I tell everybody is that the world is a safer place because I am not a practicing engineer. That is a factual statement. It's really true. But somewhere along the line, I got the idea that business school was going to be something that was for me. And so I was waiting tables at a restaurant in St. Louis, Missouri, getting ready to start graduate school. And one of my fellow servers invited me to an open house for a marketing company. And I thought marketing was going to be a major focus for me in graduate school. And I was at a time in life when there was no doubt that a free meal was very appealing to me. And I figured, okay, marketing, free meal, I'm there. I got to the meeting. It was just kind of in a nondescript business complex. And there was only one seat left in the room that was open. It was right in the middle of the room. And that actually becomes an important part of the story because about 3 minutes in, I learned what an open house for a marketing company is. I'm just going to say this to everybody. If you ever get invited to an open house for a marketing company, ask a few more questions than I did. Because what I discovered after 3 minutes, it was actually at a recruiting meeting for a multi-level marketing pyramid organization. I have nothing against those organizations, but I had no interest in selling water purifiers to my family and friends, which was what they wanted me to do. And so now back to the point that I'm in the middle of the room. What do? I don't want to be here. I don't want to listen to this pitch. Do I kind of shimmy my way out of the room, or do I hang in here until the break? And I decided I didn't want to cause a ruckus, so I just hung in there. And I'm so glad that I did, because they started talking about what does it mean to be an employee. And it's like a big dark cloud entered the back of the room, and there was weeping and gnashing of teeth, and it was a terrible thing to be led by somebody. And I felt like, God tapped me on the shoulder in that moment and said, hey, it doesn't have to be that way. And I just started thinking at that moment, what if I'm working for you, Hampton, and somebody comes to me and says, hey, what's it like to work for Hampton? Couldn't the answer be, it's one of the most incredible experiences of my life? I can't believe how much I'm growing. I can't believe how much we're accomplishing. I can't even believe how it's affecting my family. But that night, as people described being an employee, they did not say those kinds of things. And so I did leave at the break, by the way. I grabbed a sandwich and I headed out the door. But that night, I decided I'm just going to start interviewing everybody that I have access to about how they see leadership and what they understand about it. And every single person that I sat down with, I just finished the discussion with the same question, which is, who else should I talk to? And they would give me 3 names, and I'd call all those people up, and I'd say, hey, Sally, this is Tim. You don't know me, but Hampton said, oh, Hampton, yeah. And nobody said no. Nobody said no. Now, sometimes I had to wait a couple months to get an appointment, but everybody was so gracious with their time. And that really launched my career 20 years ago of focusing on and becoming, obsessed may or may not be the right word, but just passionate about the issue of leadership. So that's how my journey started.
Wow, that's so cool, and that's really impactful to think about. A lot of these multi-level marketing companies, and really a lot of people, just believe that that it stinks to be an employee. And in a lot of cases, it does because of poor leadership. Right. And so it's cool to hear how that sparked your interest in all of this. And so I guess rewinding 20 years after you talk to all of these people, I mean, what happens next?
Well, eventually all of that, I wasn't networking on purpose, but that essentially became a bit of an effect of all of those interviews. And I ended up getting a leadership consulting position with a small boutique consulting firm probably about 15 years earlier than I thought that I would. Like, I had this plan that when I was 45, I'd have enough experience and I'd be able to speak to some things. And somebody took a chance and said, hey, you're 32. We'll probably, you probably know enough, or we'll teach you. And I got an opportunity to work for that firm, and it was such a shaping moment. But in the midst of being at that company, we started doing some research because we had data. We would bring people up to the west side of Pikes Peak for a week at a time and put them through a number of assessments. And our clients would be asking, what's the magic mix? What makes somebody more likely than not to be an exceptional leader? Do I look like I'm going to be or am an exceptional leader? And so we had enough data to run the numbers and do some statistical analysis. And that statistical analysis, all those years ago, really shifted the direction of my career. I was already really passionate about leadership, but it opened my eyes to some things. And since that early research, most of my career has been focused on helping people understand what that research uncovered.
Okay, well, now the big question, we have to understand what that research uncovered. And before Tim goes, I've probably said this 10 times on this podcast and talked to you in person. So we're going to pause for 3 seconds to see if you know what that research is. There's 2 big leadership qualities. See if you can get it. 3, 2, 1. All right, we'll see if you got it right, Tim. What'd you find?
So we had a personality assessment we were using, a natural abilities battery, and a leadership 360. And the idea is there some combination of personality and natural abilities that gives you a better than average chance of being an exceptional leader? And so our resident number cruncher, Vanessa Kiley, she got on the computer and did her thing with the SPSS software, and she came back to us, and here's what she found. Absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
She found no correlation between personality, natural ability, and leadership performance. But in her effort to try to find something, you can tell the computer, just look for correlations. Just get out there. Anything that you can find, go look for it. And thankfully, she did that analysis. And the computer came back and basically said, you're looking in the wrong place. You're looking at personality, there's nothing there. You're looking at natural ability, there's nothing there. But you should look at your leadership 360. And so when we brought all that data together, what we found, or what Vanessa found for us, is that we had 8 aspects of leadership that were being measured on that 360. And we discovered that just 2 of them were responsible for 77% of the variability on the assessment. In other words, my favorite analogy in the world, and there's probably a very obvious reason why it is a pizza. So if somebody out there is not familiar with pizza, please rectify that situation as quickly as you can. But imagine a pizza. We all know what a pizza looks like when it's cut into 8 equal slices. We know what that pizza looks like. And that's what we expected. We were measuring 8 aspects of leadership. And so we thought, if they're all equally important, that's just a pizza that's normally cut up, as you would imagine. However, this pizza, this data was showing that 2 slices were worth 77% of the pizza. So just imagine what that pizza looks like. You've got 2 slices that are just a little over 3/4 of the pizza. Obviously, those 2 pieces are more important than all of the other pieces combined. And so what we discovered as we took a step back from the data, and I'm going to save everybody here about 3 years, which is kind of funny to think about now, because we had the data, we knew what it said in general, but we didn't really know what it meant. And one day I'm staring at a whiteboard, and it just lands on me that the difference between those 2 huge slices and the other 6 is that those 2 slices were about who you are as a person, and the other 6 were about what you do as a leader. And that's when the light bulb came on. We said, oh my goodness, that means that 77% of leadership is about who you are, not what you do. And those 2 slices We're inwardly sound and others focused. And so that was the big, like, oh my goodness. But then over the years, as I've had conversations with leaders literally from all over the world, it holds every single time that the leaders that they have followed that have been the best and the worst were that way, primarily driven by those two qualities, being inwardly sound and others focused. And I will say that has been true. It doesn't matter what continent I'm on. It doesn't matter what country I'm in. It doesn't even matter if there's a cultural bias against those qualities. When you ask people who's the best leader or who's the worst leader you've ever worked for, it comes back to 3/4 of it is about those two qualities, inwardly sound and others focused.
Man, this is amazing. I don't even know where to go with this. I just want to replay that because I need to hear it. And I've been preaching this for the last 6 to 12 months as I've heard that, yet it's still a struggle. It's like I know that those are important, yet it's like either my like selfish desire or like my flesh that still oftentimes falls into those what you do, not who you are. So what are some of those what are some of those other qualities that people oftentimes are like, they think that's what leadership is all about?
Yeah, I think there are two that float to the very top that we think of. One is motivation. How do I motivate people? And the other one is strategy. How do I think strategically? Now strategy's like, this is the sexy thing to talk about in leadership because everybody went, let me just get the right formula. Let me figure out the right go-to-market strategy. Let me figure out the right products mix. How am I going to be Steve Jobs and come up with this intuitive design that that's our strategy. That is a very, very common thing for people both to complain about in the marketplace because I need more strategic leaders and for people to pursue. I'm going to come back to motivation in a second, but on strategy, I'm not anti-strategy. But what we don't understand enough is the connection between strategy and who we are. So let me give you an example. And I've seen some of these things play out in real life. So let's talk about inwardly sound for a second. Let's say I'm insecure as a leader. I'm in a leadership position. I got to tell you, I've seen deeply insecure leaders in boardrooms of very profitable very highly capitalized organizations. So don't think that the stories that I share here are necessarily about some small mom and pop store. I'm talking publicly traded companies here. And so you see a leader who's in the room, who is insecure, and somebody who's under that person gets invited into the strategy conversation at the executive table. And that happens quite a bit. It's developmental for the person. It's the right person in the room. We want to get that person's perspective. We think they have something to offer. And that insecure leader says, you know what, we've got a protocol in place where I can keep that person out of the room because it wasn't followed just exactly the right way. And so all the channels are worked, and that person goes to the president and say, hey, we didn't follow the protocols, and that person literally gets removed from the strategic conversation. So you're saying, how would something like insecurity impact strategy? Well, if you take the voices out of the room that need to be a part of the conversation, your strategic options just went down. If you jump over to the others focus side of things, and let's talk about the issue of humility. If I'm a president or CEO of a company and all the ideas have to be mine, it won't matter if we have the right people in the room. If I'm so full of myself that all the ideas have to be mine, I'm not going to listen to anybody else. I'm not going to listen to the good ideas in a room. And again, our possibilities for our strategic options are now shrunk. And so that's the image that we use with our clients to help people understand the connection here is that of a tree. There's the roots that we don't see, and there's everything above ground. Who you are is equivalent to those roots that are coming up out of the ground. You don't see them, but they affect everything above ground that we do see. And so in those couple of examples, we can see how not being inwardly sound and not being others focused actually makes you a less strategic leader. There's an impact and connection between the two. So before I say anything about motivation, let me pause there and just, is there anything you want to follow up on that? Or go ahead.
No, I mean, I like the tree analogy a lot. And I think like the first time I heard inwardly sound, others focused, I had an idea. I was like, okay, I think I understand what this means. But can you give us your definition of what both of those things are?
Sure. I mean, I'm going to reel off a bunch of words really fast here. So,
okay.
Let's start with others focused. I say 5.5 qualities, and that'll make more sense in just a moment. So the 5.5 qualities of being others focused are attentive, curious, empathic, humble, a Greek word called agapon, and then our half at the end is emotionally mature. And I'll explain why that's a half in just a second. So we jump over to inwardly sound. We're going to talk about being secure and settled, so just the opposite of the insecurity we just talked about a moment ago. We talk about self-aware, principled, holistically healthy, purposeful, and the other half of being emotionally mature. Emotionally mature is that 11th one, and it actually has a foot in both worlds of inwardly sound and others focused. And so we kind of say 5.5 in each category, and they both share part of being emotionally mature. So those are the qualities that we talk about with our clients. Those are the qualities that we work with the leaders that we're trying to serve. How do we help them become those 11 things more tomorrow than they are today?
Okay. Good to know. Would you say, like, does being inwardly sound help you be others focused? Like, do they play off of each other?
Yeah, they do. And yes, you're right. So being inwardly sound, if I can settle some of I come back to secure and settled because it's such a profound one. If I'm not wondering whether or not I belong in the room, if I'm not wondering whether or not I have a clear value to add, or if you jump down to another one, if I'm not seeing how my purpose shows up here in the work that I'm doing, if I don't have those things going on, it's going to be tough for me to be really others focused because I've got a lot of unanswered and uncomfortable questions about myself. And so I would say that inwardly sound is foundational to being others focused. Now, here's another thing I'll share with you is that with our clients, we actually don't start with inwardly sound, which sounds counterintuitive, like if it's more foundational. The reason why is because others focused is a little more accessible. It's a little easier. The inwardly sound work is really hard to do. And if we don't have the relationship and credibility yet, and we go directly into your kitchen and start throwing the pots and pans around, we don't yet have the relationship for that. So we actually build momentum and credibility through others focused and then go to inwardly sound with our clients. But yes, inwardly sound is what enables really great levels of being others focused.
Okay, that makes sense because it's like you can tell anyone and give them practical tips to be others focused. I imagine it's like, ask more questions or listen more than you talk or whatever it is. But I guess what makes the others focused a part of who you are and not what you do is being inwardly sound, because it actually makes it a part of, like, you're not just doing it because you know it's right. It just becomes who you are is what I would imagine.
Well said, Hampton. Well said. Yep. Very good.
I've been practicing on saying that a while.
Well, it was very good. It's really good. I mentioned motivation earlier, and I want to come back to that for just a second, because when we put these variety of leadership qualities in front of people, it's actually the one that gets the most votes. Out of the 8 that we were measuring, most people recognize that motivation matters. They get that, look, if there's no wind in the sails or gas in the tank, pick whatever analogy you want to. If we don't have the energy to go somewhere, it doesn't matter if our plans are great. And I think people are right about that. What I think we miss and misunderstand is the connection between who we are and the motivation of others. And so one of my favorite exercises to do with leaders and leadership teams is to read them an email. And in the first round, I read them an email. The email is about, hey, there's a really great opportunity, but it's going to be really hard. And the first time through the exercise, I imagine them to really visualize receiving this email from somebody they don't trust and rate their level of engagement. And then we do a second round. Imagine you're receiving an email from somebody you really do trust, and I read the exact same email. And then I ask them about their level of engagement, their level of motivation. And we've started keeping statistics on this. So between round 1 and round 2, now just mind you, we literally changed not a single word of the email. This is the perfect scientific experiments because you're only changing one thing. You're changing the trustworthiness of the leader delivering the message. And we have found that the average increase in engagement between those 2 emails is 254.8%.
Gosh.
So there's my engineer coming out. We could call it 255, but I wanted you to know that we're actually calculating it. So 254.8. But the point here is this. Why am I bringing that up? I'm bringing that up because when you're inwardly sound and others focused, you are more trustworthy. You're a more trustworthy person because I'm not trying to satisfy my unhealth, and so my inwardly sound really becomes important. And also, by the way, when I show up at work, I'm not about me, I'm about you. When we show up with those two things, we are inherently more trustworthy. And the email example that I just shared with you shows the connection between trustworthiness and engagement. And so I think the thing that we don't talk about enough is how being inwardly sound and others focused is actually motivational to the people around us. We're not talking about rah-rah speeches and that kind of, I mean, it's great if you can do that. But a speech in a moment's not going to make up for who you are the rest of the week all the time. You got to be the real deal. And it turns out that we are highly motivated by people who are inwardly sound and others focused because we trust them. And so I think people are right to identify that motivation is really, really important in leadership. I just think we misplace how important just who I am as a leader as it plays into creating motivation for others.
That email example, that makes so much sense. I think maybe the lie that I've fallen into or other people fall into is like, yes, I need to focus on other people and I need to take care of myself and be inwardly sound, but I'll take care of that once my people are motivated or once we've set the strategy in place, but it's like, yeah. I used to think, I thought that I was a good leader because I wasn't afraid to stand in front of people and talk, and so I thought motivate them, but it's like they were only motivated to the level in which they trusted me. Which now makes a lot of sense after hearing that. Wow. So what is, we talked about this before, what is ironic about these two qualities?
Yeah, there is something that's deeply ironic and really encouraging, especially if you're somebody earlier in your career, earlier in your life. So these two qualities, inwardly sound and others focused, you need a total of exactly 0 followers to work on these two things. You could start this morning, this afternoon, whatever time it is you're listening to this podcast, you could start right now to focus on becoming more inwardly sound and others focused. And wouldn't it be better, not to depress anybody else who's a little bit further on who might be listening, but wouldn't it be better to get those things more in place before we have leaders? Wouldn't it be better if we had those things in place before we had followers? So we're preparing to lead well by working on becoming more inwardly sound and others focused ahead of time. So you don't need a single follower to work on becoming more secure. You don't need a single follower to become more holistically healthy. You don't need a single follower to work on being more curious and empathic and humble. You don't need any followers to work on those things. You just need the will to work on those things. And I think that should be really good news for all who are early on in their career, early on in life.
See, this is one of those moments that I'm like really struggling to stay in my chair because I'm with you. Like this is so true. And I think that here's the thing. Organizations all across the world are failing at providing leadership development strategies, personal development strategies, whatever, to all of their people. But do not, if you are, my age or a little bit younger, or you don't have any followers, or you don't have a leadership title, don't let your organization's lack of development in you be an excuse not to focus on leadership skills right now. And the coolest part is you get your reps by being others focused and inwardly sound first. Like that's just what blows me away. It's like the two most important qualities in leadership. You can practice that with your cousin or your friend. I mean, so
that's
like,
right. That's 100% true.
By the way, it's only going to help you. Probably the more that you do that, the quicker you would end up getting, followers anyways.
Yeah, that's true because you become more trustworthy. Let me throw one other thing in here because I think one of the things that we encounter in the marketplace, which I think is important overall, is this idea of how do we maximize something that we call who-based development. If we're going to be developing who we are, what does that look like versus developing a skill? What are the differences? What's necessary? And so if you want to get out there and work on this, even before you have followers, or even if you do, it doesn't matter either way, there is a set of three that we believe is really important. And so as you think about pursuing this, let me put these three things in front of you and say, hey, if we can make sure these three things are present, I've got a better shot at being successful at who-based development. And we call it DCT. DCT stands for depth, community, and time. So depth is, we're not going to just talk about actions. And one of my favorite things to share with our clients is if you are going to have world-class leaders in your organization, you have to have world-class conversations about leadership. If you are unwilling or unable to talk about something deeper than actions, you're going to fail, because who we are is deeper than actions. And what I mean by that is, what are the motives and what are the perspectives behind those actions? So we have to have depth if we're going to pursue who-based development. We have to be willing to pick up the rock of action and look underneath and see. Sometimes we're going to find some ugly stuff under there. Sometimes you're going to look at some motivations that aren't very pure, and maybe some things that you wouldn't necessarily want other people to know about. Well, that's what is required in who-based development. Community's not very complicated. Basically, we all need accountability. Matthew Kelly's a consultant. He says there are many things that make us unique as human beings. The need to be held accountable is not one of them. And I love that he said that, because it's true for Hampton, it's true for you, it's true for me. I don't know anybody who wakes up in the morning and said, please give me more accountability. And yet it is something that we all need. And we know that, hey, if we're going to go work out at 6 o'clock in the morning, I think if I'm remembering my statistics correctly, we're 6 times more likely to show up if we're meeting a buddy to do that. So it's just simply that, to follow through on the actions and activities of working on who we are. Community plays a big role, but it also gives us a chance to learn from other people's experiences. We get to watch their story unfold and learn from that, and they get to speak into ours. And so there's 3 different things that go on in community that are really valuable if you can do this kind of work in a community of people. And when I say community, you might think big numbers. I just think 2 or 3 other people. If 2 or 3 other people are willing to engage with me, share their stories, I share mine, and we work on becoming more inwardly sound, others focused together, that plays a huge role in continuing to move forward. And the last one is time, and everybody hates it. Everybody hates that it takes time. They just give me the blue pill or the red pill, or whichever was the right one for the Matrix. I'm not remembering right now, but just give me the pill so that I can be these things. And just human development rarely works that way. It is almost always something that happens, to quote my friend John Ott, over time, not overnight. And so it takes time for us to develop these qualities. I mean, we'll go back to the tree analogy. You're driving down the highway. In the median, you see this huge, enormous, strong, beautiful oak tree. How long did it take to get like that? I mean, that was not a week and a half. That was a lifetime. And so one of the things that we need to make sure is, I love TED Talks, but 18 minutes is not going to be enough for us to grow and develop in these qualities. And so if you hear this and you're thinking, I want to pursue becoming more inwardly sound and others focused, my encouragement to you is to focus on depth, community, and time. We got to be willing to look underneath actions. We got to have traveling buddies with us that we can learn from, that will tell us the truth. And we got to give these qualities more than a week and a half. We've got to focus on them for an extended period of time. And if you do that, you've got a great chance at growing in who-based development.
Those are great practical steps right there. And something that I think about a lot is, I think people my age, there's this rush to the people that are highly driven to get that promotion, to get those followers, that title, whatever it may be. But some of the encouragement I've gotten is just learn. Like, where are you going to grow the most? Like, that's why I work at WildSpark, because it's like, this is where I'm growing the most. This is what I'm learning the most about. And it's like, if you are highly driven, whether you actually are inwardly sound or others focused, in the world we live in, you'll probably get some title at some point. Like, if you work hard. So it's like, what would it look like to be patient for a minute and just really focus on the who and the roots before you're having to spend all this time inheriting other people's problems? Because like when you're a manager, it's like you're dealing with all of those, and it's probably harder to work on yourself. Well,
it is. And I just imagine, again, I keep coming back to the tree analogy because it works pretty well. imagine you're looking at a time lapse of a tree over the course of a year. And what you get to see in that time lapse is all of the external factors that affect the tree. There's wind and there's rain, and depending on where you live, there might be sleet and hail and snow and beautiful sunny days, and birds are going to come in and nest. So there's all these different things that come in and affect you. The deeper and stronger the roots, the less you're going to be swayed into a place of danger for yourself, in the analogy here being the tree. And so, yes, as you take on leadership, you're going to take on problems. Hopefully I didn't just, burst everybody's bubble, but that may be the definition of leading at some level, is that you're taking on new and bigger and numerous problems that are not just your own. And so how important is it to be able to be totally grounded, totally rooted, pun intended, in who you are, so that you can continue to be that big, strong tree that other people can count on.
Man, that's good. I love it. I want to talk a little bit about you for a second as we finish up here. I understand it sounds like you were in Atlanta for quite some time, but it sounds like you live somewhere totally different than Atlanta now. What's going on in your world?
Yeah. So as we do this interview, it is October of 2022, and in February of this year, my wife and I were talking about just life in general, contemplating, when we have 4 kids, all 12 and under, and you're trying to figure out what's best for all of them. And she said to me, what if we just did something totally different for a year? And in our relationship, I'm probably more apt to be the person to say something like that. So when she said that, I was like, "Whoa, really?" And as the progression and prayers came forward, we decided to take kind of a crazy step. She was deeply influenced by a book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, which is right over Hampton's right shoulder there. So she got into that in February. I eventually read. Does listening to the book count as reading it? I hope it does. So
I think it counts. It counts.
All right. So in April, the irony of me listening to The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry is when I did it. My oldest son, like you mentioned, we lived in Atlanta. My oldest son had a soccer game in Savannah, Georgia, 4 hours away. So I got to spend 4 hours driving to a soccer game and another 4 hours. By the time I got home, 8 hours in the car, I had listened to a book that at a certain level was berating me for the very thing that I was in the midst of doing. Now,
I love it.
John Mark Comer wasn't berating, but he was making a point. So influenced by that, and frankly, a number of other things as well, we decided to sell our house. We got rid of way more than half of our possessions, and we moved to Northwest Montana. And so I had a lease in Montana before I had ever stepped foot in the state. So my wife's a researcher. We found a place through the interwebs, signed a contract, sold our house this summer, and in July-August area, we made a trek across the country, and our whole family is now in Kalispell, Montana, at least through June of next year. And so we feel like it's a really important developmental step for our family. We're all experiencing different things by being here. Certainly, Montana is a different place than Atlanta, Georgia, Northwest Montana. Our theme for the year is a slower pace in a beautiful place. And I will say that is guiding a lot of our decisions. I've taken off in the middle of the week a whole lot more than I did in Atlanta because Glacier National Park is literally in our backyard here. And so we're just having a different kind of year. All of our kids who are very into dance, and both of our boys were playing academy soccer, and we have almost nothing on a schedule at this point. We're not doing any scheduled activities, save being engaged with our church here. And it's created a totally different dynamic in our family. I would say that on a given night, I spend probably more time with our 4 kids on one night here in Montana than I did in a week in Georgia. And it's been a really, really rich experience. And we're only 10 weeks into this thing. So it'll be really fun to see how the rest of the year unfolds. But that's what we're up to on a personal standpoint.
Man, that's special. I can't wait to hear how it continues to go. I'm sure this year will be awesome. Would you say that, well, it's probably been crazy getting out there, but as you've settled in, has this move helped you be a little bit more inwardly sound and others focused? I feel like it has to.
Well, at a minimum, it creates the space for it. At a minimum, it creates the space. And so, there are certain things I mentioned at the time. Like, like over the last 3 weeks, I probably have just seen a hole in my schedule and not filled it with to-dos, which there's plenty to do, and said, no, we are going to go to, on Friday. We did this on Friday. I had one half an hour meeting for work, and then we went to this lake in Glacier National Park. We just drove up there for 2 hours and see this incredible beauty. And so, I'm doing that almost on a weekly basis now, and that was just not a part of our life. What that is doing, though, it is creating space. It's creating space for relationships within the family. It's creating a little space to think a little bit more. So it is moving us in that direction, moving me in that direction. And sometimes we need a little help. And in my case, getting out of the normal reality of urban life in Atlanta and sitting, if I'm not careful, I'll start crying. Sitting on our back porch, watching the sun go down over the Rocky Mountains is not really something I have an easy time putting words to. And I have a file of pictures that's just Montana sunsets, and they're relentless. It's amazing. And just when you think you've seen it all, you see something, and it's crazy because it's the mountains. Like, theoretically, it's not changing, but it's just amazing how God's paintbrush works. And so it's been a really special time, and we've got a whole lot more ahead of us. So I think it is helping us all take steps in those directions.
Man, no, I can only imagine. And I know living in America and definitely Atlanta, nothing against Atlanta, but it's just all the traffic and the go. Like, that's a challenge, and it's a pressure to be like that. I know that the Ruthless Elimination of Hurry talks against a lot of that, and you've taken one of the most practical steps of obedience in really what I think we're called to do. Not that everyone has to move to Montana, but just really to slow down and prioritize rest.
It's funny you say that, because I saw a bumper sticker the other day. It said Montana is full. People in Montana do not want more people to come to Montana. I do think that there's a post-COVID reality where a lot of people are making shifts. And that's not so much our motivation, but I think it was for a lot of people who are really taking advantage of, obviously, remote work being more normal now. And so they're moving to more remote places, and it changes the dynamic in places like this. And so, you don't have to move to Montana to slow down. That's a really important point, because we could have taken a year off from all those activities in Atlanta, and we would have experienced some really positive things. So you don't have to. I mean, feel free to sell your house and get rid of a lot of your stuff and go to Montana, but you don't have to do that to take this step. And I will say, in the realm of who is the champion here, I've got to call out my wife, Sarah. She's if you're an Enneagram fan at all, her home base is 6. And if you're not familiar with that, the 6 on Enneagram cannot rest until all threats have been eliminated. And of course, all threats can never be eliminated, not all of them. And so the idea of all the mechanics of moving across the country and totally changing how your life operates, I'm a little bit more adventurous naturally. And so for her to say yes to this, for her to be obedient to where she felt God was leading her, she really deserves a ton of credit. I mean, it was certainly a big step for me. I think it was a monumental step for her, and she was willing to do that. So to me, in this story, she is the biggest champion for her willingness to give this a go.
That's a big deal. Shout out to her. I love hearing that. Well, Tim, this has been awesome. I want people to know more about you, and they want to know more about you. So where can people find you? Where can they find your book? Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, the book is The Only Leaders Worth Following, and you get a chance to hear about all the research that you and I talked about and a whole lot of client stories mixed in there. So that's Amazon or wherever you buy books. Our website, probably the easiest way to get there is beworthfollowing.com. And then we have a podcast by that same name, Be Worth Following. And those are the places where you can find us.
Man. Okay, sweet. Well, this has been awesome. I've learned so much. I can't wait for people to learn as well. Thanks so much, Tim.
Thanks, Hampton. Love what you were doing with this podcast, my friend.